Here's the next thought process, right? This is a classic case of how we see the problem is the problem, all right? Here we go.
$5 and a class on entrepreneurship. The class was at Stanford University, and the students were presented with a challenge. The instructor split the group of students into teams, and then handed each team an envelope with $5 of seed funding for their brand new operation. They had one task: turn the $5 into the most money possible in a short time frame. The final part of this exercise came early the next week, when each team was required to present to the rest of the students, highlighting what they had done and the amount of money they had generated. I'm sure you are all now strategizing in your head. What would you do if given the same choice? And I'm guessing you're wondering, well, what did the winning team do? Would it surprise you to find out that the winning team didn't even use the $5? So what did they do? Well, they sold the rights to that presentation to the rest of the class to a company in town that was more than happy to pay them for the privilege of pitching a group of brilliant Stanford students with the aim of recruiting them to join their organization upon graduation. The winning team spent the short amount of time they had maximizing the real opportunity they had, the presentation, which required challenging the constraints of the exercise. In this case, that $5 in the envelope. Constraints prevent innovative ideas from ever developing. Step number one, if you want to excel at decision making, always start by challenging the constraints. I find the decision-making process fascinating. I run the strategy team at Ability. We're a leadership development company based in Austin, Texas, that places people in team-based competitive business simulations to mimic the decisions they make in the real world to better prepare them for the challenges ahead. In the past 3 years alone, over 20,000 professionals in over 30 countries have participated in one of our simulations. We get to work with some of the most innovative companies on the planet, and we get to witness firsthand what truly exceptional decision-making looks like. The 3 steps I present today are distilled from those observations, and they focus on what to do before you decide. It doesn't matter if you're a professional on the precipice of a critical choice, or a parent in the midst of a conundrum considering the path to take with your child, or a student deciding what school to attend or what major to pursue. We all make thousands of decisions each day, and we are all striving for an edge. I started with that Stanford story because it highlights something that I see time and time again in our simulation. Too many teams jump right into solving a problem, and they accept all the constraints we present them with. If you want to excel at decision making, begin by considering what barriers are holding you back. Start there and see what is possible. Step number 1, challenge the constraints. To introduce the second step, I want to share something that probably won't surprise you. One of the most impactful periods during our simulation is actually after the experience is over, when people and teams reflect on what went right and what went wrong. We do this often in life, and we call this exercise a postmortem because we wait until the event has concluded. Here's what our time with leaders around the world has taught us. Take this postmortem approach and flip it around. Embrace a premortem. Consider what failure would look like before you ever go down a path. It's human nature to strategize an approach and then formulate all of the ways that you will be successful. Don't get me wrong, it is great to envision your success, and you really should only pursue decisions that you believe will have a positive outcome. However, I've watched professionals strategize grandiose plans of the many ways they will triumph in our simulation. But many times, all of that energy comes at the expense of spending any time brainstorming how they might fail and the many ways they might fail. So now let me tell you a story about snakes, the British government, and a striking example of where a pre-mortem could have averted a decision-making disaster. During the era of colonialization in India, the British government was concerned about the number of venomous cobra snakes in Delhi. After countless failed ideas, the government decided to offer a cash bounty for every dead cobra. Initially, this was an extremely successful approach, as a number of snakes were killed for this new reward. Here's the problem. Imaginative individuals started to breed cobras explicitly for the income they could now generate. It didn't take long. The government became aware of this, and they quickly scrapped the reward program for dead cobras. However, this led the cobra breeders to set their now worthless snakes free. The wild cobra population became even worse than it was initially. The apparent solution for the problem made the situation even worse. This is now, unsurprisingly, referred to as the cobra effect. It is also a perfect illustration of the power of a pre-mortem. Before we decide, we choose most often to imagine what success will look like. And then, for some reason, we wait until the experience is over and go over with a fine-tooth comb and conduct a forensic post-mortem. Invest the time up front contemplating how an idea you are considering could end in failure. Step number 2, embrace a pre-mortem. To introduce the third step, I want to share a story from 1999 about a NASA mission to study the climate of the planet Mars. After almost 10 months of travel and a build cost of over $125 million, the Mars Climate Orbiter spacecraft burned and broke into pieces due to a navigational mistake. The fascinating thing about this failure was that it was entirely preventable. There were multiple teams working on the project. One of the teams used the metric system in their calculation. Another team provided crucial data using inches, feet, and pounds. Some of the smartest people on the planet, legitimate rocket scientists, forgot to check that both teams were using the same unit of measurement, and the consequences were catastrophic. Thus far, I've stood on this stage and I've told you that your first step should be to challenge the constraints to allow you to think big. Then I told you that most of us are predisposed to contemplate success, and instead you need to balance that and contemplate failure. Those first 2 steps allow you the capacity to think outside that proverbial box we hear so much about. But the third step is vital, and it's often overlooked. Never forget to check the basics. I have watched senior leaders of Fortune 500 companies concoct truly impressive strategic plans in our simulation with multiple levels of complexity in an effort to win the game. But many times, they let small details prove to be their downfall. During one of our simulations, completely unbeknownst to the participants at the onset of the game, over the course of the experience, we're going to challenge them with unforeseen external events. These events range from unexpected product recalls to social media PR disasters, all the way to natural disasters, like hurricanes that put their virtual employees at risk. Many times, though, it is actually the more simple tasks of bringing a product to market that trip a team up. The steps required to bring a product to market actually don't change throughout the course of our game, and they're pretty basic. But once we introduce intense adverse events and the clock continues to tick down, teams then struggle to complete those basic tasks. Step number 3 before you decide, check the basics. Never let the minute details be the downfall of the decision on your doorstep.
All right, so challenge the constraints. That's the first thing you're going to have to do, because when I share with you, here's what some of you are going to do by lunch, maybe by first coffee. You're going to go, well, I can't do that. You maybe can't do that, but you can do a version of that. The question is does that make sense to you to do something like that? That's a better question. If it makes sense to you, then you need to find a way to be able to do that, right? So, first of all, challenge the constraint. Second part is, how could this possibly fail? Whatever you're doing, how could this possibly fail? We don't ask that question very often. What does failure look like? What does success look like as we go? This is happening. I'm just going to tell you right now. I'm going to skip real quick to today, right? We are now in a data-centric world. Everybody's talking about spin rate, spin efficiency, whatever. And you still have to throw it over the white thing. You know that. And how's that going for us? I would say with velos up, which they are, nastiness of pitches up, which it is, you're going to have, play with me for a second. Is that going to be more hard to get the ball in the zone or less hard? It's more hard than ever before, and yet we hope we can do that. We don't like walks, but we do very, very little in between outings to do anything about it. We just don't like them, which is kind of almost like childlike. I mean, we don't like it, but we don't want to do anything about it. You need to be able to, if throwing strikes, if getting your best stuff over the zone is that important, and I would tell you that it is, then how are we going to do it, right? And that's that detail part. So you go back, let's circle right on back. Well, this is a constraint. I have a constraint of time. I have a constraint of equipment. I get it, right? What are you going to do about that? Or are you just going to do what everybody else does and hope that you can win on the margin? That's what a vast majority of people do, and that's why we all end up searching for Otani. He can just go do it. Right? And I will say this out loud. The Angels had two of the best players that have ever played in the game, and they never were above 500. That ain't it, Sparky. That ain't it. Right? He hadn't even played in a playoff game. Do I think he's a phenomenal athlete? Yes. That's not, yeah. Yes, maybe the best of all time. I'm not sure what that means. Still comes to pitching. That's why we're here, right?